They laughed when she sat down, not the kind of laugh that slips out by accident, or the warm kind shared between old friends. This was different, sharper, meant to sting. It came from well-dressed mouths with practiced smiles, from people who'd never had to check a price tag before stepping out the door. She heard it before she even realized it was about her. A woman in a silk gown leaned toward another guest, her voice low but venom-laced. She must have gotten lost. Someone else muttered, "Who let the help sit there?" The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. Not when silence followed them like a spotlight. She had chosen that table on purpose, in the far corner of the ballroom, near the swinging doors that led to the kitchen, where the waitresses ducked in and out, balancing trays of wine and tiny appetizers. It wasn't marked. It wasn't reserved. But it felt safe. The women sitting there wore black shoes, with soles worn thin from hours of standing. Their nails were clean but unpainted, their voices soft and practical. She knew their kind. They were her kind, so she sat with them, not because she was told to, not because she didn't have another option, but because it was the only place in that shimmering, echoing, expensive room where she didn't feel like a fraud. But then came the laughter, and the stares, and the whispers. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Her throat tightened. Her heart pounded hard against her chest. She wasn't wearing designer heels. She wasn't holding a champagne flute like the others. She didn't sparkle the way the rest of the room did. She had told him this would happen. "I don't belong at weddings like this," she had said. Weeks earlier, when he first brought it up, he had smiled in that quiet, certain way of his. "You belong anywhere I do." But now, sitting here under chandeliers that looked like glass galaxies, she felt small again, like the girl who used to wait by the back door, hoping no one would notice her in the room. Her fingers reached for her purse. She could leave. She should leave, and then the music shifted. The double doors at the front of the hall opened, and he walked in. A pause fell over the room like a curtain. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He scanned the space, taking in the faces, the silence, the tension, and then he saw her, still sitting, still shrinking, still trying to vanish. Their eyes met across the room. She looked away first, out of habit, out of fear. But he was already moving. His steps were steady, confident, measured. He crossed the ballroom without a single word. The crowd parted for him without knowing why, and when he reached her table, the one everyone else had already dismissed as invisible, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He looked around at the faces still watching and said, clearly and without decoration, "She's not sitting at the wrong table." The words hung in the air like the final note of a song. "She's sitting exactly where she belongs." And then, "To her, if they don't see you, that's their problem." He extended his hand, and for a moment the world held its breath. She could have stayed, could have refused, could have run. But instead she stood, and when she did, she wasn't small anymore. She was born in a place where people whispered more than they spoke. A tiny apartment above a hardware store, with cracked windows and a floor that creaked every time someone crossed it barefoot. The kind of place that smelled like dust and fried onions, no matter how many candles her mother lit. Her mother worked 12-hour shifts cleaning houses she'd never be invited to sit in. Her father, a name on a birth certificate and nothing else. She learned young that there were two kinds of people in the world: those who made noise, and those who cleaned it up afterward. She was raised to be the second kind. By the time she was 5, she understood silence better than most adults. By 7, she knew how to stack plates in a way that made no sound. By 9, she could enter and leave a room without being noticed. Invisibility was not a curse. It was survival. On weekends, she accompanied her aunt to work in a mansion on the other side of the city. A place where shoes clicked on marble and laughter echoed in long hallways. She never crossed the front door. Always the service entrance. There she learned more lessons. Lesson 1, never speak unless spoken to. Lesson 2, never stand in the doorway. Lesson 3, always keep your hands folded when idle, just in case someone needs them. She saw the daughters of the rich twirl in front of mirrors, trying on dresses they'd only wear once. She watched the wives sip wine and gossip, tossing around words like charity and legacy, and she wondered quietly what it would feel like to be the one who wore the dress, not pressed it. At night back home, she'd read library books under a dim lamp. Stories about girls who were chosen, noticed, loved. She'd press her fingers to the pages and wonder if that kind of life existed beyond paper, but reality had its own way of reminding her who she was. In school, she wore the same shoes until the soles peeled. She ate lunch alone more often than not. When she was called on in class, her voice came out so soft, some teachers thought she was mute, but she wasn't. She had words. She just never learned how to make them matter. By the time she was 16, she was working full-time after school. By 19, she'd stopped dreaming altogether, not out of sadness, but out of practicality. Dreams were for girls who had time to chase them. She had bills, and a mother with tired hands, and a world that never once asked what she wanted, but even then, even in the quietest, hardest moments, something inside her refused to go completely dark. She still read, still wrote things in the margins of notebooks, still watched people and imagined stories behind their eyes. And when no one was looking, she'd pretend. She'd stand in front of the cracked mirror in the bathroom, hold a hairbrush like a microphone, and whisper lines she'd memorized from books, not because she thought anyone would ever hear her, but because it was the only time she got to be seen, even if only by her reflection. She didn't hate her life. She just didn't think it belonged to her. And in all those years of wiping glassware, folding napkins, and vanishing from photographs, she never imagined that one day the man at the head of the table would look only at her. The first time she saw the house, it didn't look like a home, it looked like a museum. The walls were white, not the kind of white you could touch, the kind that made you feel dirty just by standing near it. Even the windows seemed to hold their breath. She was there to fill in for someone else. A last-minute call from her aunt, who was now the head housekeeper for one of the wealthiest families in the city. Just for the weekend, her aunt had said. "They're short one girl. Keep your head down. Don't speak unless you're asked to." She didn't argue. She never did. When she stepped inside, she moved the way she always had, quiet, fast, invisible. The kitchen was massive, bigger than the entire apartment she grew up in. It smelled like fresh lemons and cold marble, the kind of clean that didn't feel lived in. The staff moved like gears in a watch, precise, polite, professionally silent. No one asked her name. No one cared. She was another pair of hands. A shadow in uniform, and that was fine until she met him. He wasn't there that first day or the second. But by Monday morning, as she wiped down the long mahogany table in the study, she felt it, the presence of someone who did belong. His footsteps didn't echo like the others. They had weight, direction. She didn't look up when he entered the room, but she could feel him watching her. Not in the way men sometimes watched, the kind that made her shrink, made her leave. This was different. Still, she kept her eyes down. Finished the last corner of the table. "Move toward the exit. You missed a spot," he said. She froze, turned slowly, cloth in hand. Looked at him. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't mocking her either. She walked back to the table and leaned forward to check. There was nothing, not a fingerprint. "Not a smudge, I'm joking," he added. And then, just for a second, he smiled. She didn't. She nodded politely and turned to leave again. "What book is that?" he asked. She blinked, paused. He pointed to the small paperback on the shelf she'd been rearranging. The spines cracked. "Means you've read it," she hesitated. "Twice," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "And?" "The ending's weak," he smiled again. "I thought the same." That was it. No invitation, no flirtation, just recognition. Two people who had, somehow, read the same words. She didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. Over the next few weeks, she stayed on staff. What was supposed to be temporary became part-time, then permanent. The other maids liked her. She was efficient, silent, reliable. The house stayed the same, cold, clean, full of lines you weren't supposed to cross. But him. He began to appear more often, not always in conversation. Sometimes he'd just pass by and leave something. Behind, a book, a note tucked between the pages. "Let me know what you think of Chapter 9. Have you ever read her other work? This one reminded me of you." She never asked why he was doing it, and he never asked if she wanted him to stop. It was nothing. It was everything, because every time she opened a book with his handwriting inside, it felt like someone had left a light on just for her. The notes never came with a signature, but they didn't need one. His handwriting was unmistakable, angled, sharp, but not rushed. Like every letter was chosen carefully. Like even ink obeyed him. The first time she found one, it was inside a hardback copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Sitting in the reading room where no one ever actually read, she hadn't touched it, but when she walked by, something about the angle of the spine caught her eye. It was pulled out just a bit, almost like it had been left that way. For her, she opened it, and there it was, on a folded piece of cream stationery. Beauty without soul. Seems familiar, doesn't it? She looked around instinctively. No one. Just the ticking of the antique clock. She slipped the note back inside and returned the book to its shelf. She didn't mention it to anyone. But the next morning, when she returned to dust that same room, she left a note of her own. Just 4 words. Scribbled on the back of a dry cleaning tag, "Soul without beauty lasts." She hid it in a different book, a few shelves away. She wasn't sure he'd find it, but he did. That's how it started. A game. A conversation that never needed voices. A slow, careful unraveling of two people who weren't supposed to see each other at all. The other staff noticed he was around more. The house manager commented once that Mr. Talbot's been choosing to work from home lately, but no one asked why. And if they noticed the way, her hands trembled slightly when he passed too close, or how she lingered a little longer in the rooms he had just left, they said nothing. They had all learned how to look without seeing. He never crossed a line. He never touched her. Never said anything that couldn't be overheard. But it was in the way he watched her. Not like she was something to possess, like she was something rare, and he was afraid to blink. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that she was imagining it, that he was bored, that she was convenient. But there were moments when she'd walk into the study and find a book open to a page with one sentence underlined, and it would say something like, she had no idea how loudly her silence spoke, and her knees would feel a little weaker than they should. She tried to talk herself down. He's just being kind. This isn't a storybook. Nothing's going to happen. But part of her, the part that still lit up when someone remembered her name, started to hope, and that scared her more than anything else. Because what if she hoped, and he stopped? What if she let herself feel something, and he reminded her she was just the help? So she made herself smaller again. She started answering with shorter words, avoiding eye contact, not picking up the books he left behind. She thought maybe if she made herself invisible again, the feelings would disappear too. But then came the garden, and a question that unraveled everything she had tried to hold together. It was late afternoon when he found her in the garden. She was trimming the lavender bushes along the stone path, trying to keep her head low and her thoughts even lower. The sun was soft that day, slipping through the trees in golden lines. A breeze moved through the hedges. The air smelled like salt and soil. She didn't hear him approach. "You've been avoiding me." She froze mid-snip. Slowly, she stood upright, brushed her hands on her apron, turned. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked uncertain, a little hurt, but not angry. "I haven't," she said. "You have." A beat of silence passed between them. Neither flinched. "I don't want people to talk," she said, barely audible. "They already are." That made her eyes drop. "You can't be seen with me," she added. "Not like that." He stepped forward, just enough to close the gap between them, not close enough to touch, but enough for her to feel the weight of his presence. "I don't care what they see." "I do," she said quickly, "because I've spent my whole life trying not to be noticed. You get to walk into a room and be respected. I get laughed at, ignored, or worse." He didn't argue. He just let the silence stretch again. "And then there's a wedding next weekend. My cousin's. I'd like you to come with me." She blinked. The words didn't make sense at first. "Come with you," she repeated. "To a wedding?" "As my guest," he said. "Not the help, not the staff. With me." The air left her lungs all at once. It wasn't just an invitation. It was exposure. It was danger. "I wouldn't know what to wear," she whispered. "Then let me take care of it. I wouldn't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "They'll know," she added. "They'll see me and know I don't belong." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not with pity, not with hope, with certainty. "You belong wherever you decide to be." She didn't say yes right away. She spent the next few days turning it over like a stone in her hand. What would she wear? How would she walk into a room full of people who never looked at her as anything but background? How could she stand next to him and not feel like an imposter? But then she remembered all the books he left behind, all the pages with underlined phrases, all the moments he saw her when she was doing her best to disappear. And slowly, fear turned into something else. Not confidence, not pride, but something softer, permission. She didn't tell anyone when she said yes, didn't ask for opinions, didn't practice what she'd say. She just waited for the dress to arrive, and when it did, she tried it on behind a locked door. And for the first time in her life, she didn't look away from the mirror. The dress arrived in a plain box. No logo, no ribbon. Just white cardboard and a handwritten note inside. "No one else has ever worn this." Thought that mattered. She ran her fingers over the fabric, soft, deep green, the color of forests just before rain. Elegant, modest, not trying to impress. Just enough to say, "I'm here." She tried it on alone, barefoot on the tiled floor of her small apartment. The hem brushed her ankles. The waist held her gently, as if the dress had been stitched by someone who knew her shape better than she did. She didn't cry, but something inside her cracked, quietly, like ice breaking under the surface of a frozen lake. The wedding venue looked like something from a magazine. Glass walls, water features, tables set like art. People arrived in waves of perfume and laughter, wearing dresses that cost more than her month's rent. He texted that he'd be late. A flight delay. She considered waiting outside, but the staff at the door welcomed her by name, a name she wasn't used to hearing in elegant places, and showed her in. So she walked, slowly, heart racing. Eyes down, she scanned the room looking for a place to hide. Not a literal hiding spot, just a chair, a table, a quiet place to sit until he arrived. Then she saw them. The maids, dressed in simple black, smiling politely, eating quickly, seated at a table near the kitchen doors, the exact place she would have been working. Not long ago, she felt something strange then, not pity, recognition. She approached. "Unsure, do you mind if I sit for a bit?" she asked. They looked at her, unsure who she was, and nodded. She sat down, and for a moment it felt right, comfortable. Then came the laughter. It started, softly, like the sound of glass clinking in the distance, but she knew the difference. This wasn't celebration, this was targeted. Someone to her left whispered, "I thought that table was for the staff." Another voice, "Maybe she thinks she's helping." Someone at a nearby table giggled, "That dress looks like it came from clearance." Heat rushed to her face. Her breath shortened. Her palms began to sweat. She straightened her back, folded her hands in her lap. But she couldn't stop hearing them. The laughter grew, not louder but more cruel. She tried to stand. Her legs didn't move. Someone across the room snapped a photo. She saw the flash, heard the shutter. That's when she reached for her purse. She would leave, quietly, without causing a scene. She would melt back into silence, the place she knew best. And then the music changed, just slightly. Enough to signal something was happening. The entrance doors opened, and he walked in. He didn't rush. He didn't scan the room in panic. He just walked calm, certain, like he already knew exactly where she was. The laughter died before he reached her table. The same people who had whispered, pointed, and smiled with the cruelty of the elite now turned their heads like guilty children, as if caught mid-prank. She was still holding her purse, still, halfway between standing and collapsing. Their eyes met, and for a moment she expected him to look away, to freeze, to act like he didn't know her, but he didn't. He walked directly to her, past rows of white linen tables, past stares and raised eyebrows, past the women who had once tried to capture his attention, with painted lips and diamond wrists. When he reached the table, her table, he looked not at her, but around her, at them. "Is there a problem with where she's sitting?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the silence like glass. No one answered, but someone near the back scoffed softly, just enough to be heard. "We were just wondering who she's with," the man said. "Didn't know we were inviting the help." A quiet, cruel chuckle followed. She wished the floor would open, that the ceiling would fall, that he would leave, walk away, pretend. Instead, he stepped closer. "She's with me," he said. Not a defense, a declaration. Gasps rippled like waves through the room. A fork clattered to the ground. He turned to her then. Eyes steady, voice low. "If you want to leave, we'll go. If you want to stay, we'll stay." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was tight. Her eyes were burning. Her breath caught halfway up her chest and refused to come down. He extended a hand, and this time she took it. Not because she needed saving, but because, for the first time in her life, someone didn't make her choose between love and dignity. They walked out slowly, together. Every step felt louder than the music. Some stared in silence. Others looked away in shame. A few whispered, trying to rewrite their expressions into something more gracious. But it was too late. The moment had happened, and no one would ever unsee it. Not her, not him, not them. They didn't speak in the car, not for the first few miles. She stared out the window, watching trees blur into one another. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, as if still trying to behave. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was full, heavy with things that didn't need to be said yet. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting open, palm up. Between them, she glanced at it once, didn't take it, didn't need to, because the loudest thing in that car was the unspoken truth. He had chosen her, in front of them, without shame, without flinching. She had dreamed of being chosen once, long ago, in the cracked mirror of a childhood bathroom. But she never imagined it would feel like this, not triumphant, not victorious, just quiet, like the final breath before the lights go down in a theater. The fallout began the next day. Calls she didn't answer. Texts she didn't open. Photos she didn't want to see. People from the wedding tried to soften the edges of their cruelty. We didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. She should have said something. Some were polite, some were fake, some disappeared altogether, and it didn't matter, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't shrinking. She didn't explain herself, didn't apologize for making people uncomfortable. She just stood. He gave her space, didn't push, didn't try to buy her silence or erase her past. Instead, he offered something else, a question. What do you want now? She didn't know how to answer. She had never asked herself that before. She had always wanted what was safe, what was quiet, what wouldn't get her noticed. But now she wanted more, not riches, not revenge, not power. She wanted to grow, to read books she never had time for, to study, to write, to walk into rooms and not apologize for being there. So she signed up for night classes, borrowed books from new shelves, started carrying a pen in her bag again, and every now and then he'd leave her little notes, not in books this time, but in the margins of her notebooks. Your words are sharper than mine. I'm proud of you. Don't stop. The world didn't change overnight. Some people still looked twice. Some still whispered. Some still laughed, but she no longer flinched. She was no longer made of silence. She was becoming someone else, not because he saved her, but because he reminded her that she didn't need to be invisible to be safe. She was allowed to exist out loud. She never wanted fame. She didn't want applause, or headlines, or to be introduced as the one who... What she wanted was simpler. To walk into a room and not feel the need to fold into herself. To speak without rehearsing every word in her head. To matter, not loudly but undeniably and slowly. That became true. Her night classes turned into full-time study, literature, history, social dynamics. She soaked it all in like someone who had waited too long to be taught. The professors noticed her quickly, not because of her past. Not because of her name, but because she listened differently, spoke precisely, wrote like someone who had lived 1,000 lives. Beneath her skin, she submitted a short essay for a local writing competition, didn't expect to win, didn't expect anyone to even notice. But 3 weeks later, she received an email titled, "We'd love for you to share your voice." Her piece was chosen to open the event, not just read, performed, by her. The night of the reading, she stood backstage in a soft black dress. Nothing flashy, just fabric that fit right and let her breathe. The room was full of strangers. Some academics, some artists, some just curious enough to wander in. She stepped up to the mic. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She read slowly, clearly, like every word had been carved from the silence she used to live in, and when she reached the final paragraph, she looked up from the page and said, "For most of my life, I thought being invisible was the safest thing I could be. But invisibility isn't protection, it's erasure. And we don't owe anyone our silence." The room was still. Then came the applause, not for the man she had once arrived with, not for the story they thought they knew, for her, for the woman who had written her own name, in ink that no one else could smudge. After the event, a woman approached her near the exit. She was older, sharp eyes, soft voice. "I know who you are," she said. "But more importantly, I know what you are." She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because for once, she didn't feel like someone's plus one. She was the main character, and she wasn't giving that back. The second wedding was smaller. No chandeliers, no orchestra, no guest list bloated with distant cousins and business partners. Just a garden, a long wooden table, and sunlight that came through the trees like blessing. She wore white this time, not the white of fairy tales. No glitter, no princess sleeves, just a soft flowing dress, simple, sharp, hers. She hadn't sent out formal invitations. She didn't need to prove anything. The people who mattered would come, and the ones who needed to stay away already had. He stood at the end of the aisle, calm, still, waiting, just like he always had. But before she walked toward him, she paused, not out of fear, not out of hesitation, out of instinct. There was a table near the back, not decorated like the others. No place cards, no flower arrangements. It was where the staff sat, the cooks, the servers, the girls in black shoes who made everything look effortless and never got their names remembered. She walked toward them. The server closest to her looked up, confused. "Excuse me, are you looking for someone?" She smiled. "No, I'm right where I need to be." She sat down, just for a minute, folded her hands in her lap, took a breath, and looked around, not to see if anyone was watching, but to remember. This is where it began, a seat in the corner, a place that wasn't meant for her, until she claimed it. One of the staff, a young girl with her hair tied back too tight, leaned toward her and asked softly, "Aren't you the bride?" She nodded. "Yes." The girl blinked. "Shouldn't you be?" She smiled again, not wide. "Just enough. I'll walk down the aisle in a second. But I needed to sit here first, to remind myself that I don't need to run from where I came from." She stood, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and when she walked to the altar, she didn't float. She didn't glide. She walked like someone who belonged because she did, not because she was invited, not because someone pulled out a chair for her, but because this time she chose the seat.